All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to break down the journey of creating wealth, looking at how fortunes are really built. And spoiler alert, it's not just about business plans. It's about belief, strategy, and in the end, what it all means.
So, let's kick things off with a pretty wild story. Picture this. Jim Carrey, the actor we all know, right? Well, back in 1987, he was completely broke. But he did something kind of strange. He drove up into the Hollywood Hills and literally wrote himself a check for $10 million for acting services rendered. And get this, he dated it for Thanksgiving 1995. Fast forward to right around that exact date, and he got paid that exact amount for the movie Dumb and Dumber. It's incredible. Reality literally caught up with his belief.
And that story is the perfect lead-in to our first big idea. See, building wealth, it doesn't really start in a bank or with a spreadsheet. Nope, it starts right up here, in your mind. Those internal stories you tell yourself about money and success, they're either going to be walls holding you back, or they're going to be the blueprint for everything you build.
You know, the success coach Jen Sincero, she really nails this. She talks about how for years her story was, I'm bad with money. And she had, as she put it, a lifetime of proof to back that up. We all have those stories, right? But then something shifted. She just made a decision. I love how she says it. She became unavailable for being broken anymore. That was it. The first step was just realizing what story she was telling herself and saying, nope, not anymore.
Okay, so how do you actually do that? How do you change the story? Well, one tool, and I know it can sound a little cheesy, is affirmations, but stick with me here. The whole point is to consciously hit the brakes on those old negative thoughts and start writing a new script. So when you're repeating things like, my past doesn't predict my future, you're not just saying words, you're actually building a new foundation in your mind. It's kind of what Jim Carrey did, right? Just with a check instead of a mantra.
So, before we move on, this is a really important question for you to think about right now. What's the story about money that you've just accepted as true? What's that tape playing on a loop in your head? Because just identifying it, just hearing it, that's the first and maybe the biggest step to hitting delete.
All right, so we've talked about the mindset piece, which is huge. But how does that actually play out in the real world? Let's look at some blueprints from people who have built actual empires, a lot of times from pretty much nothing.
Okay, let's take Elon Musk. What's fascinating here isn't just one big win, it's a pattern. He didn't just hit the jackpot once and call it a day. He started his first company, Zip2, sold it, and then what did he do? He rolled that money into his next venture, X.com. And when that became PayPal and sold for a fortune, he did it again, this time with SpaceX and Tesla. It's like a staircase. Each success became the foundation for the next, even bigger bet.
And look, this pattern isn't just about tech billionaires. It's really about perseverance. Think about J.K. Rowling, a single mom on government assistance getting told no by publisher after publisher. Or Chris Gardner, the guy whose life became the movie The Pursuit of Happiness. He was literally homeless with his little boy while interning at a brokerage firm. I mean, can you imagine? What these stories scream is that resilience, that ability to keep going when everything is telling you to stop. It's not just a nice to have, it's everything.
So the big takeaway here is that you don't have to build a rocket company or write a global bestseller to use these same principles. The cool thing is, today's world has opened up so many more doors for building wealth. So let's get practical. Let's talk about a modern playbook.
A huge concept in wealth building now is this idea of passive income. Sounds great, right? But what does it actually mean? It just means making money that isn't tied one-to-one with the hours you work. The goal is to build systems that earn for you even when you're sleeping. And as you can see, this breaks down into a few main areas. Things like investing, creating digital products, rental income, and even side businesses.
Let's zoom in on one of these, digital products. Because this is something that's totally changed the game. You used to need to be a coder or a designer, but not anymore. Seriously, you could start with something super simple, like social media templates or a budget planner. You can whip them up using a tool like Canva, which is super easy to use. And then, instead of having to build a whole website, you can just list them on platforms that already have millions of customers. It's such a low-cost way to get started with a really high potential upside.
And this is a really important point. There is no one right way to do this. It's all about a trade-off. Let's compare two paths. Writing an ebook, for example. That's going to cost you a ton of time up front, right? But very little actual money. On the flip side, you could invest in something like a REIT. That's basically a way to invest in real estate without buying a whole building. That takes money to start, but way less of your time on an ongoing basis. So the question for you is, what do you have more of to invest right now? Time or money? That's how you pick your path.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Let's say you've got the mindset down, the strategies are working, you're building wealth. Then what? This brings up a much bigger, much deeper question. What's the point? Once you have it, what is all that money actually for?
A fascinating modern example is Mackenzie Scott. When she and Jeff Bezos divorced, she became one of the richest people on the planet. And what did she do? She almost immediately started giving it away in one of the biggest and fastest philanthropic efforts we've ever seen. We're talking billions upon billions of dollars.
But what's really interesting is how she's doing it. It's a totally different philosophy from, say, the old-school industrialists like Andrew Carnegie. His idea, which he called the gospel of wealth, was basically that the wealthy were wise and should decide what was best for society. So they built big institutions like libraries and museums. Mackenzie Scott's approach is the opposite. She essentially finds nonprofits doing good work and says, here's a ton of money, no strings attached. You're the experts on the ground, you know best how to use it. It's a huge shift from control to trust.
And, we have to be real about this. It's also super important to look at how these massive fortunes were made in the first place. Carnegie's empire was built on the back of some really brutal industrial practices. You have things like the Johnstown flood, where a dam at a private resort for the rich failed and killed thousands, or the Homestead strike, where his workers who were fighting for better conditions were violently suppressed. It's a stark reminder that how wealth is made raises as many ethical questions as how it's spent.
And that really brings us full circle. It leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If you stop seeing wealth as the finish line and start seeing it for what it is, a tool, a really powerful one, then you have to ask yourself, what would you do with it? If you had that tool in your hands, what would you choose to build?